From Classrooms to Careers is presented by the Spring Branch ISD Alumni Foundation. This series is made possible through the generous support of First Community Credit Union.
Well, welcome to Six Schools, One Legacy, from Classrooms to Careers, where we highlight the stories of exceptional graduates from the six high schools of the Spring Branch Independent School District. Each conversation explores the path from student life to professional life, the lessons, the challenges, and the moments that shape the journey. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by General Mark Kelly, who graduated from Spring Branch High School in 1980. Welcome, General Kelly.
Good to be here. Thanks, Paul.
So, talk a little bit about where you grew up. I know that and before we started recording, you mentioned you went to Spring Branch Junior High as well. But did you live your whole life in the Spring Branch area?
We did. We did. We moved. My family moved from Illinois to down to the Houston area, in the early '70s, and then so I was 8 years old, and then once we got nested there, right off Campbell, off Base Drive, BACE Drive. Went to Spring Branch Elementary, Spring Branch Junior High, and then Spring Branch High School. And so family nested there and stayed there through all of my schooling years.
What was your memory of that? I grew up. I'm a little older than you, but I grew up in that same era, and it was just a wonderful time, wonderful childhood in that area. Did you have the same experience?
Yeah, we were lucky that we had a really, really good neighborhood full of friends our age, and of course their parents, and a lot of interaction of the kids and parents, and the same sports teams, same activities. Um, we obviously, as you know, didn't have I won't call it distractions, but the interests of the current generation in social media and stuff like that. And so I think we were outside more,
Yeah,
and interacting with each other more, and kind of making our own fun and mischief around the neighborhood. And so really, really idyllic upbringing in that area, and just a really good group of friends that I still stay in touch with.
that's great. And so, tell us a little bit about you went to Spring Branch Junior High School and then transitioned to Spring Branch High School. What was that transition like?
As going from the Memorial side and the Spring Branch side, it was a mix of two different, literally two different sides of the highway, two different sides of the track. So, matter of fact, when we played football in junior high, the coaches had an icon over the players' helmets of where they were going to go to, which high school they were going to go to. I assume they did that for the benefit of the teams that were going to receive the junior high players. But it was bit of a cultural mix. I think mostly good,
Uh-huh.
mix between the two cultures. One obviously more affluent than the other. But then going off to Spring Branch High School, then you mixed in with folks who came from Landrum Junior High and the others around the area. And so a really good mix. And my older brother preceded me at Spring Branch High School, so it was kind of an easy on ramp
Mhm.
to mix in a whole bunch of my friends that was played sports with, and same thing in junior high. We're going there, so really, really pretty easy transition into high school.
Did you start playing sports for the school in junior high school?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, I started kind of we played organized sports as really as young kids, 8
Yeah,
years old, playing little league and football, stuff like that, but as far as organized for the school, yeah, in junior high.
yeah. And then did you continue that into high school? Did you play any sport?
I continued into high school my freshman year, and then ended up having frankly, an injury that I just could not power out of for the season. Once I off ramped there, I didn't play football anymore. I played baseball.
Okay. Talk about some of the other extracurricular activities at Spring Branch High School that you're involved in.
Yeah, interesting enough, when I thought about this interview, about what were the influences in my assessment of the environment around Spring Branch High School is it was a community of middle class, maybe slightly upper middle class parents. I had a lot of friends whose parents worked like out at Cameron Ironworks when that was still there. Other industries there, a lot of one of my good friends, his father was a fire chief over off Gessner, et cetera, et cetera. And so you had a real big group of middle class kids, which meant that you're going to be raised in an environment where honest work mattered. And so, and the other piece of that was the environment. My memory of Spring Branch High School was that if you were going to do something extracurricular, like have a vehicle, not necessarily going to college is extracurricular, but if you don't have a scholarship, it's extracurricular. You're going to have to find a financial path to that. And so a lot of my extracurricular work when I was in high school was work.
Yeah.
And so I had a job or jobs throughout my high school time. And those were, I would say, probably the most powerful influence I had both on work ethic and seeing how different businesses ran. And by a wide margin, I would say the biggest influence I had was I worked, frankly, as a janitor over at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall over
Oh,
very close to Spring Branch Elementary, not far from Spring Branch High School. And in those years, in the late 70s, the veterans of World War II were frankly my age now,
yes.
in their upper 50s, 60s. And so those gentlemen and their living history had a really profound impact on me, just being in and around them and listening and catching up on some of some of their stories and some of their life experiences that they had.
Yeah, and, the jobs that we had when we were in high school, I was a janitor as well at a department store, so you took what you could get when you're that age and save for school and going to the movies or whatever it was you were gonna do, so it was something that, I think, kind of a rite of passage for a lot of us and a necessity for a lot of us too. Talk a little bit about, some of the maybe teachers that you might remember or some of the principals that you might remember from your time at Spring Branch?
Yeah, I'd say some of the we had a distinct math teacher, Mrs. Lee, who was besides a great teacher, I think she kind of uh operated under the construct of the most benevolent love is tough love, and so care enough about your students to hold them to a high standard, of which, being that age and that level of lack of maturity, I would have much rather had an easier path to getting a B or an A, but she wasn't going to sacrifice her standards. And so it kind of challenged you as a student to actually study your way to get a B instead of finagle your way to get a B. Some of the counselors were very helpful. I frankly don't remember their exact names. I remember where their office was. I remember
Yeah,
seeing them. But when I expressed initial interest in the military, they were very helpful at getting, the materials. Of course, we have to remember, back in the day, back in that era of the late 70s, there you couldn't just go onto the internet and download them. You
sure.
actually had to, reach out and have somebody mail you something to get material. And so good memories of teachers who held you to a high standard, which now I appreciate. In the time of being in class, I didn't, but now I do.
You just mentioned that, when you expressed an interest in the military, so that interest, that ended up becoming your career, was, something in high school that was sparked?
Yeah, it was sparked, like I mentioned a minute ago. It was really sparked by the gentleman that I saw on a daily, weekly basis over at the VFW hall, who had their formative years of being in their day of being 18 to 20. They spent in World War II, traveling the globe and doing our nation's bidding, and unfortunately losing friends, but then making friends that continued on post war. They survived all of that effort, and it made a really powerful impact, and all of them, to a man, recommended if you're going to go in the military, go the officer route. And so that kind of sparked my interest in looking into it more. And then the counselors kind of helped cap it off with finding information of what was in the art of the possible. And so that really kind of summed up kind of the path to the on ramp into the military. What that led me to was choosing to go to Texas State. At the time, it was called Southwest Texas State, where they had an Air Force ROTC program, and that really led to that the reason I went to that college.
And so, as far as the choosing which branch of service, you chose the Air Force. Was there a reason for that?
I figured flying airplanes was much cooler than anything else. And so, yeah, I looked at all of them. I mean, frankly, I gave them all a strong look. I wasn't sure I wanted to be on a ship for 6 months at a time, and there was other equities with the other services. I wasn't sure that was a good fit for me. Um, and then probably the most influential part of my high school journey was my girlfriend, who became my wife of over 40 years. And she had obviously an opinion of being gone for 6 months if you're
Right.
gonna be in the Navy and stuff like that, and so all those influences and impacts came together and kinda pointed toward, the Air Force, at least put my toe in the water and giving it a try, and that's what led me to Texas State in the Air Force ROTC program.
And how did you take to flying when you first started learning to be a pilot? Was it something
I
that was
think
enjoyable
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, when you first get in your first airplane, it's just a sensory overload. All the things that are happening, whether it be the different noises, the different sounds, the different smells. It's just a natural thing to be breaking away from the ground the very first time you do it, and then you either endure it or you fall in love with it. And I was like, yeah, I kind of fell in love with it, and so did some flying in college, got my private license, of which my girlfriend. Tanya Patterson, now Tanya Kelly, helped pay for, and that, served really, really helpful to get to pilot training.
So let's talk a little bit about that transition. You were in at college in ROTC, and when did you officially become a member of the Air Force?
So I was commissioned, in the Air Force in December of 1985, and in the, Reserve Officer Training Corps program, you you then wait until you're kinda called to active duty. My call to active duty was April of '86, and so I had, just over 4 months of time available between those 2 times. So during that time, we came back from San Marcos, where we're at college, just postgraduate, doing a little bit of work up there, and came back to Houston. I actually was a substitute teacher, long-term substitute teacher over at Northbrook
Okay.
for a few months during that time, while
Yeah.
the permanent teacher had her baby, which was a great experience. Being young and prior to entering the military, you always would need to try to make ends meet. So did that for a few months, and then we packed up what little bit we had and drove up Wichita Falls, Texas, to start pilot training up there, which is a year long endeavor, up in, like I said, Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls.
And from there, where did you go on? And tell us a little bit about kind of your moving up in rank
Yeah.
through the Air Force.
Yeah, when students go to pilot training, by and large, it's a year-long course of crawl, walk, run, flying different airplanes, normally two different airplanes, a lower performing jet or propeller into a high-speed, high-performance jet. Upon graduation, the majority of students depart the pilot training base, and they go off to fly what's called a major weapon system. It could be a fighter like an F-15 or F-16. It could be a transport airplane like C-17, or it could be a bomber like B-52 or B-1, etc. A few folks stay behind and remain as instructors at the exact same location they just finished training at. I was one of those people that was selected to stay as an instructor. It's kind of a double-edged sword because it's a great compliment that the instructor cadre would like you to stay. And frankly, as a young person looking to go off around the world and do something different, it's kind of the last thing I wanted to do
Right.
was stay. But you do it, and you do it as well as you can. So we stayed there in Wichita Falls for another 3.5 years. So in total, we were there at Wichita Falls for about 5 years. And then at the end of that duration, I was selected to fly the F-15E. It was a pretty new airplane at the time. Uh, we packed up our young family. Both of our kids were born at the Shepherd Air Force Base Hospital, and we packed up our young family and went over to Arizona for advanced training in that airplane. And then our first assignment, operational assignment in the Air Force, was in Alaska. The interesting thing about going to Alaska was, my wife Tanya had never seen snow. She was born in Alabama and lived in Texas. She'd probably seen snow as it hit Houston once every X number of years, but not really endured snow. And so we went up there for 3.5 years. Loved it. Great place to raise kids and outdoor activities, and great place to fly for that matter. And then from there, we went to another operational assignment in England, RAF Lakenheath in England, and another great assignment there. And from there, we actually did a unique job. We went on an exchange assignment in Australia, where we actually fly with the Australian Air Force. And so instead of flying F-15Es, I was flying F-18s in the Australian Air Force. And so
Mm.
we were there for just over 2 years. So for a total of 8 years, we really didn't spend a whole lot of time in the continental U.S., and we kept getting further and further away from our parents, who reminded us we were getting further and further
So,
away. And not so much that they missed us, but they wanted to see the grandkids.
yeah.
And so it was a really idyllic 8 years, though, between Alaska and England and Australia. And then after that, we came back to the U.S., where I did a year of school as a major in the Air Force, and then we went on to an operational assignment in North Carolina. The interesting part about being in North Carolina, I was back flying F-15Es. There is no sooner did I get checked out, requalled on the F-15E, the 9/11 happened, and
Yeah.
that really kind of drove the work schedule, operations tempo, assignments, if you would, for the next few years, much like it affected everybody in the nation during that time. And so, really busy time being deployed to the Middle East for both campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then came back. I was a squadron commander at that same base there. Another year of schooling after that up in DC, and then did an assignment in Idaho as a colonel now. So getting to the upper echelons of our leadership positions. And then after another assignment in Afghanistan, I was selected to be a wing commander, which is where you start to get into um, a little bit of the C-suite. You start to be really, truly the leadership of the Air Force. Most of our general officers in the Air Force are selected from post-wing command.
Hmm.
And a wing command, for example, the wing command I had was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. It's a large base, 4 big fighter squadrons, 5,500 airmen, and you've got a big installation with the roads and grounds and infrastructure to care and feed for. And so it's a pretty big operation going on, hospital, et cetera. And so it's a small city in of itself there. From there, did a staff tour in Hawaii, which is a great place to do a staff tour, and was selected there to be a brigadier general. And that was my step into the general officer ranks. Some of our bigger, more challenging wings are actually commanded by general officers. And the one I went to after Hawaii was a wing up in the Arctic and near Fairbanks, Alaska. Then after that job, being a wing commander up there, I did my third wing command, which was a wing command for a year in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan from 2014 to 2015. And that's everything you might imagine. A busy airfield, some neighbors outside throwing things over the fence, like rockets and mortars and things like that. And we had, fighters and rescue and airlift and you name it going on 24/7. Very, very busy time of the year. But you're gone from your family for a year. And so it's a very challenging time, but very rewarding at the same time. Went from there to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. Was promoted to two-star general under what's called a NAF, a numbered Air Force, which means you have multiple wings underneath you, and again a bigger scope of responsibility. And then I went from there to Davis Mountain Air Force Base in Arizona to be the 12th Air Force Commander, which is another numbered Air Force. And then eventually they caught me and drugged me to the Pentagon, where I was a three-star lieutenant general running Air Force operations. So again, you're basically in charge of Air Force operations around the globe. And then from there, I was selected to be the commander of Air Combat Command, which is essentially all of the fighter and intelligence surveillance reconnaissance aircraft of the Air Force and our cyber forces, fairly big, what they call MAJCOM, Major Command, at Langley Air Force Base. So day to day, over 95,000 airmen, and promoted to four-star. And that was the last job I held, and it was the best job I held. And it was a great place to retire from. And so retired from there in 2024 after 38 years, and
Boy,
really, really fortunate to have all the opportunities we had.
what a wonderful trajectory and a wonderful story. Talk a little bit about maybe something that you took from that 38 years that you think is just a lesson that you would have never had otherwise.
Yeah, I think probably one of the bigger lessons that I took out of those 38 years is really the attributes of high performing organizations, whether they be a sports team, a business team, a military organization. And almost all of them have really similar, if not identical, characteristics. So just really strong when you walk into a organization. Within a few minutes, you can pretty much sense out the culture and the climate, the standards of the organization, how they treat each other, how they treat other people, how they hold each other to a high standard, how they not only dissent within the organization is not only acceptable, frankly, it's expected because they want to make sure they drive to the best decision. They really don't need any external oversight because no one outside the organization would hold themselves to a high standard as they would hold themselves.
Right.
They really value everyone equally, from the leader down to the youngest member. The opinion matters, and their well-being matters, and so they treat each other that way. So you can kind of sniff that out and feel it out when you walk into some place, and that was really, really impactful as I got to meet some of the finest sons and daughters of our nation around different organizations within Air Combat Command.
Two final questions for you. The first one is if you could give some advice to a current student in junior high or high school who may be watching this in the Spring Branch School District, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think the biggest advice I would give them is, it is absolutely not a crime to venture off into a profession where you're going to make a lot of money. But I would recommend they go into something that they're really going to enjoy, because if they're doing something they enjoy each day, it's really not work,
Yeah.
you know. And there's a lot of folks that I graduated high school and college with, and I'm sure that they are financially, sitting at the top 1% of our nation, if not globe. But they don't have 38 years worth of experience of traveling the globe, meeting the finest people on the planet, doing something they really enjoy. And it doesn't have to be flying high performance airplane. It can be just meeting high performance people and getting to, do good for the greater good every day. And so do something, I would say venture off and do something that really, really strikes your passion, and it'll be worthwhile.
And my last question is this: if you could go back in time and just walk into that same veterans hall where you were a janitor, and those same gentlemen were sitting there after your career, what would you tell them?
I'd probably just tell them thanks. Thanks for what because frankly, they sacrificed their youth, their life, and their loves, the formative time where, frankly, I was in San Marcos, between age 18 and 22. And, the biggest decision I made was, where I was going to meet my friends for a beer after
Right.
class, or when I was going to do my homework during that time. These gentlemen sacrificed that same 4 years of their life, and made life and death decisions, that impacted not just their lives, but frankly the nation and frankly the globe. And so we owe them a lot, although the vast majority of them have now gone on. And so I just tell them thanks.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, General Kelly, for reminding us how powerful this journey from classroom to careers can be, and thank our audience for spending time with us. If you want, I want to encourage you to continue watching as we share stories from remarkable graduates of Spring Branch ISD, because every legacy begins somewhere.
This has been From Classrooms to Careers, presented by the Spring Branch ISD Alumni Foundation, made possible by the generous support of First Community Credit Union.